Election season in Canada is finally over. And as a Canadian investor, it's time for us to look at what has happened and how we can move forwards with our portfolios to get the best out of the next 5 years. Welcome to Golden Arch Investing. My name is Liam. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about what happened in the election and what I think is going to happen over the next 5 years based on what exactly the results were and what the policies of the now Liberal government of Canada will be for the next period of time. And today I'm going to be using two specific articles to sort of help me organize my thoughts and get through to you guys. But a lot of this is just my opinion based on what I've seen talked about, based on the discourse I've seen online, based on what I understand of the platforms of the Liberal Party, and of course on my skepticism about politicians. If this kind of content does interest you, please do subscribe to the channel. It makes a massive difference and it doesn't cost anything. I'm going to jump over right here. I'm going to put this on the screen for you. The Financial Post. I have an article from them. It's a couple of days old. So this is before the election, but it's titled Carney makes Canada's Liberal Party acceptable to CEOs again. And I think the real point of showing you this article is to say that yes, the Liberal Party has now won their fourth consecutive term. However, we can't ignore the fact that it is a slightly different Liberal Party than the one that we've had for the last three goes, which I think is a big part of why they won this election. And I think kind of pushes them back towards the centrist party that as a child, I understood the Liberal Party to be. Now, obviously, not a political channel. I'm not trying to tell you who to support. I would say who to vote for, but obviously we're past that, but just sort of my understanding. After 9 years under Trudeau, weak investment and slow economic growth has spurred Canadian executives to line up behind Pierre Poilievre, promised to unleash capital with tax cuts and deregulation. But the arrival of Mark Carney, former Goldman Sachs banker, two-time central bank governor, and BAM chair to replace Trudeau has shifted the views in some boardrooms ahead of the election. I think we all kind of knew this, right? The idea that Carney was shifting at least some people back over to the Liberal camp on Bay Street specifically. And Bay Street's one of those places, like when you're kind of in with the people of downtown Toronto, you got to assume they do skew a little socially left, but they're very much in favor of big business, in favor of things that will help the economy. So if these guys like something, might not be great for the average person, but as an investor, it might be good for our stocks. Carney says he's a crisis manager, right? He's got his 2008 financial crisis stuff he talked about, and they sort of trust him. And a big thing here, they say we can't fulfill our full potential with the ideas of the far left, right? To see government as a solution is not always the right idea. We can't redistribute what we don't have. And so Carney is promising to boost growth to offset the tariffs, right? Boost exports to Europe, boost exports to Asia, dissolve trade barriers. We've seen all this stuff. All of this is good for a lot of Canadian companies. If this happens, which is always a huge if. I do not trust politicians. But if he does manage to boost trade with Europe and Asia and remove internal trade barriers, it's going to be huge for a lot of Canadian companies. The biggest group of which are Canada's resource companies, which I have been talking about nonstop for the last little while because I think they're the biggest beneficiaries of whatever does happen over the next little while. But if he does manage to make some big consequential deals with different groups, he manages to like increase actual export capacity of things like oil and gas, which we talk about at the channel, things like, critical minerals. He manages to make investment possible. It's going to be huge. He did some moves, right? I'm going to skip over the next little section because all this stuff. And here's a big one. Prior to Mark Carney, you were oh, wow. The ads on this site are terrible. Prior to Mark Carney, you were hard pressed to find anyone in the business community supporting the Trudeau Liberals as they had badly failed the country from an economic perspective, says the chairman of BCE. Carney is viewed much more as a centrist, and the economic policies of the parties have some degree converged. As a result, the election is now much more about leadership, who can best manage the U.S. relationship, and more importantly, execute the transformation of the Canadian economy so we can live up to our potential. And the chair of Fortis goes further. He says he gives Canada what most of us want. Leader who's fiscally responsible, socially progressive, the skill to navigate the complex issues that President Trump has given us. So The real reason I'm reading through this, clearly, at least some of these guys who run these public companies, BCE and Fortis, are both public dividend stocks. We've actually talked about both of them on the channel, right? I'm not saying I'm bullish on either, but we've talked about them. And very clearly, these guys support Carney a lot more than they would have supported Trudeau. So while a lot of people are really mad about the election result, especially people who are on the sort of right-hand side of the aisle, be that fiscally or socially, at least you can agree he's a little bit towards the center compared to Trudeau. And so if you're one of the people who's been messaging me saying that Canada's economy is doomed, maybe we can relax a little bit. I'm not saying that things have gone the way you wanted, but maybe they've gone a little bit better. Now, there's some key elements of Carney's plans that I think are important to talk about. We don't really talk a lot about real estate investing, but he's got some big plans around housing, which obviously could affect some of us. I mean, a big part of our portfolio is our real estate holdings. I'm sitting in mine right now, right? My home. So depending on what that plan does, it could be good from a sort of, growing the amount of housing supply, helping reduce the housing crisis, letting my generation afford homes in more places than just, outside of the major cities and in places like where I live in Alberta, right? That would be really beneficial for a lot of the country, beneficial for growth. More people could stay here and work here and succeed here and have more money that they're not just spending on housing. That'd be good for my generation. Not as great for the older generation who has a lot of their wealth in housing. So if you're one of those people who owns, 100% of their $1.2 million home, seeing that price drop would not be a good thing for you. So depending on who you are, right, that's sort of a different story. That is if that plan goes through and if that plan gets executed correctly, which again, I'm not a big politician truster. Just as a person, I've spent too much of my life watching them not do the things they promise. So just my personal opinion, but at the very least, right, he's got a plan. We'll see how it goes. There's also the idea of, making Canada more interconnected. Again, I think this would really benefit a lot of Canadian companies, but it'll also benefit a lot of Canadians, right? A lot of us have, professional certificates. For example, I'm a teacher and we can't transfer those across provinces. If there's very simple sort of red tape, things like that, then maybe we could align that would make it easier for people to move across the country and would, help places that are harder to move to or harder to live in because it's harder to get, your profession to transfer there. Or it's harder to get your accreditation over there, right? There's all these sort of internal ideas, but obviously the one I've been harping on, I am very focused on, is resources. I think reducing the barriers to transporting resources across the country, reducing the barriers to investing in resources across the country are some of the huge things. And one of the big things that Carney did say was that he was going to put specific rules, and I'll be very careful with my words here, specific rules about how projects are permitted so that they get done. However, he is not removing all of the rules that the Conservative Party had planned to, and therefore it is still theoretically going to be hard to get a lot of mining or oil and gas sort of exploration drilling projects done in Canada, which takes us to the next industry and the next article I wanted to talk about. And anybody who watches this channel knows where this is going, right? We talk a lot about oil and gas, so I wanted to talk about what this means for them. And we'll probably do a dedicated video talking about that, but just sort of quickly, initial thoughts. We've had a couple of initial articles that have come out. Some of them are really good. Some of them are a little bit just sort of, very vague. This is one of the better ones. It's from CTV News, CTV Calgary specifically, right? So right in sort of the heart of oil country. Again, I'll put it on the screen for you guys. Canadian oil and gas industry ready to work with Carney on energy superpower promise. So this is sort of, what I'm looking at this from. Okay, you said you're going to do this. You've been a little bit vague about how it's going to happen, what it's going to look like, but you promised you were going to help Canada become an energy superpower. We're, as a country, we're ready to work with you on that. What does that look like? So I'll take you through the article here. Members of Canada's oil and gas industry say they're ready to get to work on Prime Minister Mark Carney's campaign promise to turn Canada into an energy superpower. Right? The Liberals want enough seats to form government. Canada's energy sector is a key issue on the campaign trail, with both teams unveiling plans for new pipelines. Again, one of the things that made me so bullish on the sector. In Calgary, Carney pledged to position Canada as a world energy superpower, calling for new pipelines, including one to Eastern Canada. In a statement Tuesday, Lisa Bayton, I hope I'm saying that right, the president and CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, congratulated Carney on the Liberal Party's win, highlighting the new government's opportunity to rejuvenate the economy and natural resource strategy. Again, one of the big topics we talked about here on the channel. Canada's oil and natural gas industry is ready to work with Prime Minister Mark Carney, support his goal of making Canada a global energy superpower, right? Developing our world-class oil and natural gas resources to their full potential by growing our exports to international markets will strengthen our energy security and economic sovereignty. All of this, obviously, I agree with. Mike Schultz, the president and CEO of the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors, said the results of the election showed the debate around the future of the country's energy industry has shifted. This is a really big quote here. Both leading parties recognize the urgent need to expand oil and gas development, secure Canada's energy and economic strength, and build critical infrastructure to counter rising global uncertainty and protectionism from our largest trading partner, the United States. So again, these guys are still positive. They still say, hey, we finally kind of got everyone on the same team, that this is important to have. It's very clearly possible to get these big projects done, right? If Carney proposes a big pipeline, it's a good idea. He wants to approve it. He wants to, support it. Are you telling me that the Conservatives are going to block that just for the sake of it? Or that he couldn't convince at least enough New Democrats to cross the aisle to help him out? Right? I'm pretty positive that these projects will get done if they stick to their word and they do decide to get it done. The Liberal candidate for Calgary Confederation says he plans to bring his background working in the oil and gas sector to his role, right? And he wants to make sure that the policy of the government is well understood by industry and that industry is well understood by the government, right? And he says that there is a gap there and he thinks he can be part of bridging that gap. And I think that's important. The rest of the article talks about the Alberta Premier Danielle Smith getting really quite unhappy with the Liberal government and saying that the status quo can't continue with Alberta. Whole nother story for another day. We'll see where that goes, but not really today's story. Instead today, some final thoughts about what I think Carney means for a lot of us as Canadian investors. First thing, we aren't going to see the same kind of sudden rush of investment we might have seen under Pierre Poilievre, simply because Mark Carney is less likely to cut these sort of regulations quite as much. He's not likely to sort of backtrack on everything that the Liberal Party's done. He's much more likely to find some sort of middle ground, right? He's much more likely to do sort of the soft red Tory thing, right? Where he's like, oh, okay, we're, like more sort of progressive conservative. Yeah, we still want to protect the environment, but we're going to do this project, right? We've seen a lot of those sorts of things happen in Canada over the years from more centrist politicians on either side of the aisle, right? And you could compare some of Carney's views to like early 2000s progressive conservatives, right? All the way to some of the things that even like a Stephen Harper would have done. So maybe there's going to be some of that side of him that comes out, right? Some of that side of his politics that is much more focused on the economy and that focuses down on that, especially as we're in this period of time where that's still quite a big issue. And now the election's done, it's going to be the thing people push him on. Okay, what are you doing about the tariffs? What are you doing about protecting Canada? What are you doing about building our sovereignty? Right. And that's going to come in the form of maybe national defense, right? Maybe some investment in that industry, but also those economic and energy corridors that he promised across the country, right? So how are we going to do that? Are we going to build a big old port at Churchill? Are we going to build some more LNG export capacity, right? Are we going to build that oil pipeline across the country that doesn't go down through the United States, that doesn't cross through Michigan, right? Are we going to build one just through Canada? We're going to build a new pipeline across to northern BC, right? All of these questions will be pushed and we'll see answers. But I think it's really important that at the very least, there have been promises made. And so we aren't in quite as bad a position as we could have been a year or two ago, where there was no promises made at all that this sort of stuff would happen from the Liberal side. And a final thought, specifically about the oil and gas industry. I think the people that'll benefit the most from this are going to be majors, right? I think in a world where Carney wins, we see the majors succeed more, specifically majors exposed to natural gas, who I've talked about a lot recently because I've sort of, I was looking at the odds and it looked a little bit like, if the polls were right, Carney would win a big majority. Now, he didn't win his big majority, but he does look like he's still leading the government. So natural gas is probably a more safe bet. I think it'll be easier for him to sell to his base. I think it's sort of, natural gas, right? At some level, there's a little bit of greenwashing there that might make it more palatable to that side than crude oil. It's also, a little bit less sort of provincially located, right? Yes, there's a lot of it in Alberta, but also you have BC on side, right? So maybe there's like a political argument to be made there, or like a national unity argument to be made there. And so I think maybe natural gas is a bigger winner over the next little while. But another winner, I think, is any company who is in position to just sort of sit and buy back. Anybody who can sit and buy back for the next couple of years will probably do okay, because over the next couple of years, we're going to see some things made concrete. We're going to have a much more clear direction. And then obviously in 5 years, we have another election. One of the things I've talked about with the oil and gas industry, where I'm more positive on them, is that they can outlast just about anything. And if we see crude oil, demand pick up after this recession that we might see, right? Thanks to the whole tariff thing, we see shale oil start to drop off. I think there's a real argument that those sort of, producers or exploration names that can just kind of chill, and maybe you can dollar cost average, build a big position. Then we'd see the boom that people were predicting under a Poilievre government, right? Then you could see the next cycle. Oh my God, now I've built this huge position and those guys have shot up. Well, of course, we'll talk about that more when that story does come. But those are just my initial thoughts. I think Carney winning is probably not as great for the economy, specifically for resource industries, as a lot of people would have wanted. Right? A lot of people wanted there to be this sort of, the end of the Impact Assessment Act, the end of these, Trudeau liberal policies, and a shift towards like economy first. They wanted that shift. And said we're going to probably have a more balanced approach, probably not going to get quite what a lot of people were hoping for, specifically in the energy side. And we're going to have to see what promises are kept. Are these promises made about investing in this industry, supporting this industry, building the infrastructure, having this? Is that going to happen? Or is that going to be like left to die on the campaign trail? And depending on what happens, obviously we'll shift our strategies. But for right now, I think we're okay, as long as you've been investing, dollar cost averaging, slowly building positions, and you're willing to hold. Because as long as you're willing to hold for 5 years, you shouldn't really care about politics at all. And that's about all I have for you folks today. Please do let me know in the comments below. What do you think? Obviously, please don't make this about like your political or personal views on Mark Carney, but like for the economy, what sorts of things you think will benefit over the next 5 years? Are there specific sectors you're looking at? Heard some people talking already about renewables. Maybe that's going to be the move. Obviously, there's a story there, but really interesting, really interesting. Let me know what you think. Comments down below. And with that being said, that is all I have for you folks today. And I'll see you in the next one.